All right, hello once again, welcome back. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College coming at you with Android App Inventor 2 as part of the Rankin Technical College Summer Adventure Academy series. And we are in the middle of our fifth Android App Inventor 2 application, this simple guessing game that we have right here. And the first thing I wanted to do was to come back here and set the height to fill parent. There we go. Kind of like that. There we go. All right. Now, what I have to do is I have to write code that will generate a new random number when I click that, and I will have to write code that will check the guess when I do that. So let's head over to our blocks window, and the first thing I want to do is something we haven't done before, and that is I want to come in and under variables, I want to create a brand new variable. This is going to be my random number. So I'm just going to call it rand for random number. And I'm going to initialize it, so when we first start, I'm going to initialize it to 0. All right, so that's something new in itself. We have not worked with variables before. All right, so we have to start thinking about what we want to have happen when we click, all right, when we click certain buttons, such as when we generate a new number, we want to make sure that, yes, we generate a new number, but whatever was in here should clear out, and whatever was in here should clear out. All right? So in other words, when we click that button that says generate new number, we want to make sure that whatever is in our text box guess, so we want to set the background color right there. We want to set the text, I should say, to nothing. Well, that's pretty easy to do. That's the first thing we want to do. Next, we also want to set the label that has our result in it. We want to set that text to nothing. Okay. So we come in here, we press that button to generate a new random number. Okay, that all should make sense. And we have cleared out our two fields. Hopefully, at least, that also makes sense. The other thing we have to do is actually generate the new random number. All right, so we want to change that. So we want to set our global random number right there. And what do we want to set it to? Well, if we look at math, random integer from 1 to 100, that looks exactly, and I mean exactly, like what we want to do. All right? So think about this. Play computer, as I tell students all the time. What are we doing with these three lines right here? These three lines. In the first line, we're telling it to take that, whatever's in that field, and blank it out, zero it out, whatever you want to say. In the next line, we're doing the same thing, but with whatever is in here. Then in our third line that was there, this line, we're generating a new random number. Okay? Now hopefully that made sense as far as what we're doing. I'm going to move that way over here for right now, just so that it's out of the way. All right? Because I have to also do my check guess routine. Not a long click, sorry. So start to think, again, please play computer here and start to think, what do you want to have happen when you click this button? What should happen? Well, we're going to assume that there's a value in there already. In fact, we didn't, have to do this, but if we wanted to, we could have come in here in our designer, and where we were in here, all right, we could have given it an initial value if we wanted to. Okay, we could have set its text. Just set it to 0, for example. Then there is a number in there. Now, do we have to do that? Should we do that? It depends on, literally it depends on your feeling. But we're making good progress here in that we do have it set up so that we're able to come in here and start making some checks. Now, let's start to think about what could happen. Well, what if we click check S and there was nothing in there? What if we click check S and can we set this up? Let's see. I'm going to go into here and I'm going to put in numbers only, which means I shouldn't be able to put in anything non-numeric now. And let's check that. As always, since I've made changes to the program, the emulator has to catch up. So we can come in there. I'm going to try to put in a D, a letter D. So select all. And when I put in a D, notice it's putting in 5s. All right. So I can envision 3 or 4 things happening here. Well, I can put in blank input, so there's nothing there. I can't have non-numeric input anymore. But I can have input that's either less than 1 or greater than 100. Or I can have valid input. So let's try to account for all of those in here. All right? So I'm going to put in an if statement, which is under control. And I'm going to have a few else ifs in here also. For right now, let's leave it like that, okay? So I want to say if that text box, that text box, the text is empty, okay? So if our text box text, and that's not going to work right now because I need to put in a math, and I need an equals. So if that text is equal to nothing, we put nothing in there, then we want to set our label result to you must enter a value. All right? And don't worry that these are running over one another. That's not going to matter at all. We'll move that in just a bit. Well, we can check this as we're going along. So let's do that. All right, I'm going to leave that blank and I'm going to click check S. You must enter a value. That's a good start. All right, one thing I can see, and again, this is just me, and maybe I'm a little anal about this, but with what we're putting in here, let's do our text alignment and let's center it. Again, every time we make a change like this, the emulator has to reload itself, for lack of better words. And now when I click check S, you see that now, come on. Well, that should have been centered. I'm not sure why it wasn't because I lost it, but I don't know what happened there. We'll fix it. I'm not going to worry about it. All right, so that's the first case. Next thing we have to worry about. Okay, so we came here. Let's make sure we just have enough room. So I'm going to cut that down to 18 point. And we centered it. Okay. So that's the first thing that we wanted to do. Next, or else if, we put in a number that's less than 0. So let's grab this one right here, duplicate that, and put it down here. If the guess, and we're going to say, is less than, it'll kick that out because that's not a number. If that's less than 0, well, what do we know? Then we'll duplicate this, and we'll have it say, if that's the case, all right, so if it's blank, then set it to you must enter a value. If it's less than 0, you must enter a positive value. All right? I can already tell we're going to need at least one more else if in here, but that's all right. Otherwise, if it's greater than 100, how about this? Instead of saying you must enter a positive value in here, let's change that to input must be 1 through 100. Okay? Now we can grab that same thing and do the same thing here. All right? So I'm going to put one more else if in here. In fact, I'm going to put 3 more else ifs in here. Looking pretty ugly. That's all right. So this is if it's blank, if it's empty. This is if it's we put in a negative value. This is if we put in a value that's too big. All right. Now we have to check to see if what we put in there, if that value is less than our random number. All right, so if that's the case, guess was too low. All right. How about if we put in a value that was greater than our random number? Well then, guess was too high. Otherwise, and we don't even need this right here. Actually, we can just change this to put in there. I don't need this last one. I'm going to just make that an else. Okay, so if that's the case, you guessed the secret number. All right. I think we might be finished with this first iteration, but let's take a look. All right. So let's go back. I like to run this from the designer mode. All right. It doesn't look as cluttered. So let's go back to here. And let's generate a new number. All right. Enter a new number. 50. The guess was too high. Oops. 40. Guess was still too high. 30. Still too high. 10. Still too high. 1. Too low. 7. You guess the secret number. All right? It appears to be working. That's the good news. All right? So, to kind of go back one more time and take a look at what we've done so far. All right? I'm going to take this, and for right now, I'm going to collapse this. And I'm going to bring these two out here. All right? We created a global variable, and that global variable was our random number. We initialized it to 0. Then we said whenever you click this to generate a new number, we set our text box to nothing. We could, if we wanted to, instead of setting that to nothing like we did, we could have set that to 0. Okay? And here we're setting our random number. Now, if we want to, notice we can come in here, we can add a comment here. And this says, generate random number between 1 and 100. Okay? And there should be, I don't remember what it was, but there should be a way, when we collapse the block, I thought there was a way that we could collapse the comment, because it's kind of, there. I guess just clicking on it. All right? So, let's put comments. Let's comment everything. We'll add a comment, and that comment there will say, this code runs when the generate number button is clicked. All right? This sets the value in the text box, in the guess text box, to 0. This blanks out the value in the result label. Now, some of those comments that are in there are probably like, you're like, well, that's pretty intuitive. I don't really know why we need that. All right, and it's not so much that you do, but it never hurts to put in a lot of comments. This will be a global, meaning I can use it program-wide, variable, which holds the current random number. All right? I oftentimes tell my students the story, and it's a true story, of years ago I was working for a company, and I started there and realized very quickly I didn't like the working environment, so I didn't know how long I was going to stay. Well, long story short, they asked me to create an order entry system for them, which I did. And the entire thing ended up being upwards of 10,000 lines of code. Now, that's not really true, and what I mean is probably about 40% of those lines of code were comments. What I did was I took whole program runs and embedded them into the program as comments, so people could see when you ran the program what you were looking for, and you could tell whether or not you got the right information or not. When I did announce that I was leaving, the person who was going to take over the order entry system for me, it was up running, and it was running just fine at the time. I asked him if he had any questions, and he kind of laughed, and he said, how could I have questions with all the comments you put in here? I don't know exactly what kind of questions I could have. So the bottom line is, the takeaway from that is you can't have too many comments in a program. All right, so we're going to put a couple more in. Add comment. This code runs when the check guess button is clicked. This if this handles the case of blank input. This else that's here or else if, well, that's interesting because it's not letting me put that in. So how about, can I put it here? Okay, I haven't worked that much with comments, so we'll put it all in the if that was here. Add comment. Add a condition to the if block, etc., etc. You know what? I'm just going to stop right there. All right. Code runs when the checkbox is clicked. How about this? The initial if checks for blank input. If found, it updates the associated label accordingly. The first if else if checks for negative input, and if found, updates the label accordingly. The next if, I shouldn't even just say if there, I should say the first else if checks for that. The next else if checks for input greater than 100, and if found, updates the label accordingly. The next else if checks for input less than the random number, and if found, updates accordingly. The next else if checks for input greater than the random number, and if found, updates accordingly. The final else is hit if the random number has been guessed, and if found, updates the label accordingly. Okay? Now, one thing to take a look at in here, you may or may not have noticed, is when we first start running the program, nothing magically happens. We have to click that button. to generate a random number. Okay? We're going to fix that in just a minute. We're going to fix a couple of other things too. Okay? So I'll be back with the next iteration of this program in just a couple minutes. In fact, I think what we'll do first is we'll come back up here and we will do a projects, save project as, and I'm going to call this one guessing underscore game V2. Click OK. Notice how that's changed. All right, so I'll be back in just a couple minutes with the second version of our guessing game.